Here we go. Oh, boom!
Join the team.
Man. Shouldn't have drank that mule. Whew. Hey team, this is the McGuire review, and we're going to be looking at a brand new one out of Dogmight that hasn't even hit yet called Countdown Action Edition. So let's lock in and get ready to go. Alright, Countdown Action Edition is again by Dogmight, and this one is designed by Lindsey, who works for Dogmight. But I'll have to say she did a fantastic job on this first title, as it's designed very, very well. It's a very simple, fun, group deception type game. And we'll go ahead and hit the stats. So it's a 14 plus. 5 to 15 is what this one supports. So it is something to know. You're going to need to have at least a full gaming group of 5, but it will go all the way up to 15 people, which is something that you don't always find, even in these larger deception type group games. You don't find that they'll support up to 15 people or even more than that. So this is pretty awesome that it does support that many, and 20 minutes. Now the game does play out pretty fast, and that will be depending on... As you go around the table, you're going to be asking players questions around the table, and how fast they respond to those questions or different actions that you're asking for that are going to be on these countdown bomb cards. We'll talk about those here in a second. That's going to dictate really how long that game's going to go. You kind of see the nostalgic kind of 80s feel that this game has. I love the bright colors, the purples, the pinks, the blues, the greens. I think the actual theming of the game and the coloring of the game was done very, very well. It's very bright and poppy. You kind of sit down at the table and you want to play this game just visually because of how it looks. The box was designed well. It's a nice quality made box. It's got the great colors on the front and the back as well. And it's got a little bit of artwork there on the back for the cards on the game. So let's just hit the rule book really quick. It's interesting for a game like this. It is a very straightforward, simplistic game. It is a 20-page rule book front to back. But there's not 20 pages of rules. It's very short, very straightforward. It gives you a few examples of how the game is played out, and then tells you how to set up and play the game. And then on the very back, there is a little chart that you will need. It just shows you the amount of players that are playing and the count of each type of card that you're going to need for that number of players. So you will need the rule book just to quickly set up, and then you can set that aside. You won't need that again. So really quickly, we do have role cards. So every player outside of the action hero, which will be one player, and then the rest of the players will take on a role. And you'll select a certain number of these, shuffle them up, and then you will divvy these out to each player. And in those roles, they will either be hostages or they will be villains. And you can be a hostage or a villain to be able to win. We'll talk about that win condition here in just a second, because that's one of the mechanics that I think makes this title so special. So here we have the countdown cards, and there's blue, green, and the purplish pink ones here, 1, 2, and 3. And you will select a certain number of those as well. You'll shuffle those up, and then you'll stack them on top of one another, having the blues, the 1s, the 2s, and then the 3s. And within the 3s, there is going to be one of those cards that's going to be marked with the name Bomb. And it looks just like this. It says Game Over. So once this card is flipped over, and that's really kind of the counter for the game as you go round to round, the action hero player will be selecting these cards, and that's how you kind of count down over the course of the game until the game ultimately ends when you hit that bomb card. You do have character cards here, and there are a ton of them that are in here. You have action heroes. There's quite a few of those to choose from. You have unreleased and released cards, and this is kind of a token just to show if your characters are currently released and they've been let go, or they're still unreleased, which means they are kind of captive within this environment. You've got the fantastic action scene cards here, which is another great mechanic that adds to this type of game, which you generally don't see, which gives each of the players a one time within the game action or activity that they can execute that can benefit that player, and we'll talk about those just in a second. We've also got the hostage and the villain reference cards, and this is just simply some cards that do have the reference of each one of those different types of villains, as well as characters that you can use over the course of the game to put out when you're thinking about who players could potentially be. And that's another fun aspect of this game. We'll have a reference sheet card that is right here, which will essentially just give you a reference. For each one of the icons in the game, there are 3 on one side and there are 2 on the other. And that's really the entire game as far as components are concerned. Again, it is one of those group deception games, which they try to keep pretty simplistic. And what I love about this title is there are 2 mechanics that are added in to what you would see generally on top of a game like this. And the first mechanic is every single player around the table, outside of the action hero who's asking the questions and sort of narrating the game, you can say, each one of the characters is going to have a win condition, regardless of if you are a hostage or a villain. So for instance here, our villain, the mastermind, that let's say player 4 got, it says you win if all villains are alive after the bomb goes off. So earlier we talked about in this deck there was a card that said bomb, or said boom. So when this bomb goes off, when you flip the boom card, once you get there to the very bottom, if in fact all the villains, once it's revealed who is who, if you're a villain or a hostage, are alive, and all that means is you have been released. If you're unreleased, then you kind of blew up with the action scenario that was playing out. Because essentially you're in this 80s action movie where there's a bomb, you know, you can say a bomb heist, and there's hostages and villains, and the villains have integrated with the hostages, and you're not really sure who's a hostage and who's a villain, and what that win condition is going to be for each one of those players. If you are the action hero, which the action hero, each one has their own ability as well. And I chose here the wild card, and it says you win if at least one villain and no more than one hostage is dead after the bomb goes off. So again, bomb goes off, you are dead if you are still unreleased, you are alive if you are released. So that's how that will play out. And then there at the end, you know, you'll be able to see throughout the game every player's token here if they're released or unreleased, because the action hero will be dictating that as there's actions that are on these cards, and that action hero could actually say, hey, I want to release you, or I want to unrelease you, because based on the responses the action hero is getting from the questions they're asking that player, they may think that they're a hostage instead of a villain, and they'll go ahead and release them. And that's a fun aspect of the game at the very end. You know, everybody then reveals if they were hostages or villains. And that's a really fun part of this, because the villains are going to essentially try to act like or take on a persona of what a hostage would be. So when they're asked a question, they'll stick with a persona and try to act like they're a certain type of persona and a certain type of hostage, which gets pretty funny when you obviously have multiple characters who are acting like the same, you know, persona, and you have to, as the action hero, decide which one actually is the hostage and which one is the villain. So that's a fun part. And the other mechanic that I really, really like is the action scene. So mechanic 1 that's a little bit different that I think is great is that every single character has their own win condition at the end of the game. It's also very cool that there is this action scene mechanic, which each one of the players is going to get one of these, and it's just, again, a one-time during the game. You throw it in and you say, this action scene just happened. And it might change some things. So for instance, this one says earthquake that the villain had. And at the very bottom here, it essentially will tell you what you'll get to do. And it says, look at another player's character card. So this villain could play this earthquake and then get to secretly look at another character's card to see if they are a hostage or a villain, if that particular player was curious about another player around the table. And then there's a nice little, you know, flavor text on here. It says earthquake. Someone yells as the room begins to shake violently. You and the other hostages are thrown to the ground. As the dust settles, you see another hostage's wallet open next to you, revealing their Mega Movie rental card. A rental ID. Yeah, rental ID. Nice. That's awesome. Okay, so that's how the action scenes work. And again, each one of these cards do have a win condition. I'll read another one here. Here's one of the hostages. And each one of these hostages will take on different personas. It isn't as simple as just, okay, I'm a hostage or I'm a villain. I'm a generic hostage, generic villain. Every hostage and villain will have their own unique persona. Like this hostage is a big-time wrestler. We have another one here that's a surfer. Right here's our surfer. we've got a hairband member. So you can see that everybody gets a little bit of a different flavor. The win condition on this one is you win if you are the only big-time wrestler alive after the bomb goes off. So the bomb goes off, you've been released, and you're the only character out there that's a big-time wrestler. You then win the game. So that's, that's what's so cool about this, is it isn't just you were released and you were hostage, you win. It's you were released and you met your win condition. So it's really fun when it actually plays out completely. So how would gameplay work? Well, we've set up the game here, and essentially, every character is going to get one of these tokens. Every character is going to get a random hostage or villain. Every character is going to get a random action scene, and then each one of the characters are going to get a shuffled deck of hostages and villains, and that's going to be passed around the table, and each player is going to select the hostage and or villain they want. It just has to match, their type. So if they're dealt a villain, they have to draw one of the villain character cards. Now that's a fun aspect as well, because as the players are selecting which, specifically for the hostage, which hostage they want to go with, there's a certain persona there they're going to want to take on, because they are that hostage. They're playing that persona for the game. So if I was the hairband member and I was asked, well, how did you get here today? That might be a question that the action hero asks everybody around the table, and they would go one by one to answer that question. As a hairband member, I may say, well, I've got this older van with blacked out windows, and I use that to carry all my music equipment. So yeah, I took the van to get here today. And that may be the persona that I'm playing, because I'm the hairband hostage. And you'll want to stick with that if you are a hostage, and answer the questions as if you were that type of person. And you might say, well, then that's a dead giveaway. You'll just know that person's a hostage, and you'll know you need to, probably release them. But then the fun part is the villains could take on that hairband hostage persona as well. A villain could say, no, actually, I took my van to get here as well. Because I have all my equipment, my guitars in there. And now it's, okay, well, who's telling the truth and who's lying? So that's a fun mechanic of the game that I think, plays out as well. So if we were to start the game here, the action hero would go ahead and flip this first counter over of the countdown of the bomb going off, and it says choose 2 of the following actions. And it's got those icons on the front again, which our handy-dandy card here told us what those meant. And we will choose 2 of them. We will execute them in any order that we wish to. So as the action hero, I can, on this card, it says you can ask each person a question. You can ask each person a yes-no specific question, or you can release one of the players. So, what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to do the yes-no, and I'm going to do the question. So I could start with the question, and that probably would be smarter to do that, ask more of an open-ended type question, and then drill down a little bit and get more specific with the crowd to see if you can start identifying. And then again, this is just the first card. We're going to have to go through, quite a few more cards here before the game would end. And we know that the game's not going to end until at least it gets to the bottom number 3 pink stack. Blues and greens, we're good to go. So this one says, how do you get around? So that's similar to the example that I just used. So I would ask that question, and I would go around to each player around the table, and they would answer that question. And then maybe, once I understand how they get around, I might ask a more, specific yes-no question, and then go around and get that yes and no from each player. And then that turn would be over, that round would be over. I wouldn't then be able to decide, well, I'm going to release or unrelease or do something. I have to actually get a card that has that action and choose one of those actions when it's my turn. Next round would start. I draw another card, and here we go. We've got 2 different questions as well as a release. Well, in this turn, I may want to just ask one more question, and then probably start to think about who I might want to release. And you can recapture folks if you feel like later in the game they might be lying, which is funny. Some of these cards have a symbol where you would actually unrelease them and recapture them. So I think that's pretty neat as well. It isn't like once you're released, you're just you're released for the game. You can be recaptured. So the questions that say here are, what kind of clothing are you wearing? And what is your favorite type of food? Well, I probably would want to ask, what type of clothing are you wearing? And after I know how they get around, I've asked my yes, no, a little bit more detailed question, and now I know what kind of clothing they're wearing, I probably would select the second action on this one to be releasing a character, and I probably would take a chance on releasing some of the characters based on what I knew. We'd then go to round 3, and so on and so forth. This one, you can see, has a question. I can unrelease or recapture someone, and I can ask a yes-no question. On this one, I probably would ask another open-ended question, and then I might recapture someone based on what they responded to that. So that's how the flow of the game would go, and you would continue to go through the game until you flip the card and all of a sudden got the boom, game over, the bomb went off, and at that point, everybody would reveal their role in the game, whether it was hostage or villain, and you would look at each one of the win conditions for each character, and depending on if they were unreleased or released, and what happened, that is what would give that player around the table a win or a loss condition for Countdown Action Edition. So that's the game. That's how it works. Again, this is a really cool game. I'll have to say to Lindsey, she did a really great job on this game. I am impressed with it. It's a fun group deception game that has 2 newish type mechanics that you generally don't see in these types of games. It helped the flow of the game, and I think make the game a lot more fun. All right, this was kickstarted this year, and it does look like they're going to be able to deliver early to backers, so backers should be seeing this arriving sometime in the relative soon future. You will be receiving your copy if you did do the Kickstarter. Their late pledge is obviously closed at this point because the games are already being shipped over, and they're going to be going out to Kickstarter backers. I am not sure if this one is going to show up immediately in retail or if they're going to do another reprint. I'm not really sure, but I do, team, highly suggest this game if you can get your hands on a Kickstarter copy, or if you do want to get this game, you may go ahead and just send a note to Dogmight asking them if and how you can get your hands on a copy of Countdown Action Edition. Hit that like, click the subscribe below to join the team. Keep rolling them crits. This has been the McGuire Review, and we'll see you next time. Bear, let's go.